welcome. I'm delighted this morning to be able to welcome our Minister for Farming, Mark Spencer, and also the Director for our countryside programmes, farming and countryside programmes, Janet Hughes. Our Minister, Mark, is only going to be with us for half an hour, so I think we'll go straight over to Mark in a moment, and then we'll leave Janet to pick up all the awkward questions that Mark generates for us, maybe, who knows. But we'll pass over to Janet afterwards to maybe talk in a bit more detail about the new SFI offering and other issues as well. So Mark, you've been in this role now for 10 months, and I have to say that you've thrown yourself in wholeheartedly. You're clearly in a role that you enjoy and you're well suited to, and you know, a big thank you from us for all the work that you're doing and that you've done as well. I feel that we are making progress in several areas. You know, if you look at the programs that are coming through, the new schemes coming through, we're making clear progress. But there's still plenty of, we've got to make more progress in lots of other areas. I could list loads of them, practical areas that the industry's been working on for a long time. So I think probably what we'll do is to hand over for you for 10 minutes, just give us an update on how you see things at the moment, and then we'll come back to a list of questions that we've got and some that will come in from the audience. So yeah, Mark, good morning, and hand over to you.
Yeah, so I don't think I'll take the full 10 minutes, Bill, because I think it's more important to get to what your members want to talk about. I mean, what I would say is, number one, you know, I recognise the great work that your members are doing, and I think it's quite important that we, as a sector, keep talking about what a good job we're doing. You know, we're not only are we producing some of the finest quality lamb in the world, but we're also managing landscapes that my constituents, you know, are very fond of and hold very dear. You know, they when they travel up and down on the train and they go to the Lake District and they visit the North Yorkshire Moors, or they go to Exmoor or Dartmoor, the landscapes are the thing that attracts them to those areas, and they're not there by accident. And we shouldn't shy away from just recognising and taking credit for that beautiful landscape. That's what your members are creating. You know, those dry stone walls don't mend themselves, and they're only being mended to keep the sheep in. So we should big ourselves up a bit more, I think. I mean, on a personal note, I've loved doing this job. I mean, it's been brilliant getting out there. Obviously, we're in the middle of show season. Yesterday, I was at the Great Yorkshire, and just meeting your members and looking at some of the quality stock that is out there is mind blowing. I mean, I don't know how these judges, frankly, how they pick a difference, because the quality is so good. And some of the, I mean, I shouldn't really name breeds, should I? But I happened to drop across the Clun class yesterday. I mean, these rams, they were absolutely massive. They look fantastic. And I don't know quite how the judge picked them apart, but she managed to do it. But anyway, you know, I think we live in exciting times, and I do recognise that it is pretty stressful. At the moment, we're going through some big changes. Obviously, we're moving away from the basic payment scheme into these new schemes, and I hope you'd recognise that we are trying to listen. We genuinely are ears open here, and we've run the trial pilots, if you like, last year. We took account of what was said to us. We've tweaked those schemes for this time, and you know, we're genuinely trying to do our best to pump as much money into countryside stewardship and to SFI that gives us the outcomes that we want, that supports your members, that keeps them profitable, but also protects those landscapes and offers value to the taxpayer, of course. So, you know, ultimately we have got to justify what we're spending to the Chancellor of the Exchequer and prove to him that that's a good investment of taxpayers' money. Now, I'm pretty confident we can make a very strong case, and I'm up for making that case, and I'm up for making a case for more money if we can prove that we've spent the previous 2.4 billion, you know, in the right way. So, you know, I'm optimistic about the future. I think that doesn't mean to say there aren't going to be some challenges, but you know, I think together we can overcome those challenges. I think what you have got in Rishi Sunak is a Prime Minister that understands food production and how important food production is, and obviously representing Richmond, he's very much in tune with North Yorkshire. I think that's a big advantage to us as a department and to us as a sector, because, you know, for the first time ever, we had the sort of farm to fork summit in number 10. That's a huge statement, actually, of how important the Prime Minister thinks food production is in the UK. And I think that really is, a wind in our sails within the department. So, yeah, I'm happy to take your questions, but I think we're in fair shape, and the prices are pretty good. There are some challenges out there, but we're up to try and help and solve those challenges with you.
Thanks, Mark. That's a good introduction, and I would agree. Really, I mean, we've it feels like it's been real progress actually to get acceptance of the importance of food, and there's a number of I suppose global incidents that have come along that have helped that situation with the Ukraine war and the COVID situation and problems with supply chains. But we do seem to be in a place now where food production and food resilience and food security is probably far better recognised than it was 3 and 4 years ago, and it does feel like we're in a much more balanced position than we were some time ago. Also, really welcome your comments about your the quality of stock you saw up at the Great Yorkshire Show, and I know you've seen them in other parts of the country as well. You mentioned the Clun breeds, but we've got somewhere in the region of 83 breed societies affiliated with the National Sheep Association. I know you spoke just recently about the launch of a new coronation fund that is going to help to support that genetic diversity, I guess. The one thing I'm really interested in there is how we try to make sure that we support our traditional native breeds rather than just focus on rare breeds. But I know we've got a meeting coming up next week. We're going to talk more in more detail about this, but you might just like to comment on that before I just come back to something you said about the landscape as well.
Yeah. I mean, it just happened that I saw the Clun just today, but I saw the long walls at the Royal Norfolk, they're an amazing sheep to see, and the close walls at the Devon show. So I quite like going around these local shows and looking at sort of local breeds as well. But I think you do identify that actually we don't quite know what genetics are lurking there in those pools of native breeds, and what we may need to draw on at some point in the future, which is why rare breeds are so important. So we're going to chuck a bit of money at this actually, and we're talking to the Rare Breeds Survival Trust as to how we can best support. But we're going to put a bit of cash into rare breeds, and it's actually been driven by George Eustace, former Secretary of State, who was quite keen to get involved. We've met him on a number of occasions. We're going to do a bit of a round table and just chat to a few people about how that will work practically and what we might want to invest in. But I think you never know what is lurking there in that gene pool, and which is why you've got to protect it and keep it so you can go back at some point in the future. And with the gene editing bill now having gone through the House of Commons, that means obviously starting with plants, with wheat varieties and potatoes, we can start and edit some of the genetics. And clearly within that legislation, there is a facility to move to animal genetics going forward. And I think we'll be able to use that technology to really start and draw on some of the traits that that are out there. And if we could find, if you can find a sheep that's resistant to scab or orf or whatever, then just think of the bonuses that would be available to us to be rid of those sort of diseases.
Absolutely. You also mentioned the landscape and said that you and your colleagues travel the breadth and the length of this country, and you appreciate the landscape, largely a landscape that is created, a grassland landscape that is created by grazing animals. And that takes us straight onto that subject of some of those beautiful uplands and what's going on Dartmoor, and the rollover of a number of HLS agreement, some of which are requiring farmers to withdraw stock for long periods during the year, and by 80% in number. And I just want to read you something that I received from Natural England just last week, where we've been talking to a group of farmers down on Bodmin who are being faced, but they haven't got the same profile or recognition of Dartmoor, but they're being faced with exactly the same situation. And this was a comment that came from Natural England. Bodmin is a granite upland landscape, typically treeless with extensive bogs and mires. It has a rich biodiversity. 20% of the moor is SSSI or special area conservation. It provides winter feeding for 10,000 golden plover, winter protection for over 1 million starlings. It has marsh fritillary butterflies and breeding waders, and it sounds great. So this is a recognition that Bodmin is great. And the rollover of the HLS agreements are requiring that a number of farmers are going to cut their stock by 80%. And you think, well, it's being recognised as being brilliant. You know, why do people want to change it when we feel it's a great environment offering some great habitat? You know, what's going on?
Yeah, quite. Which is why I think the Dartmoor review we've appointed David Furston, who's sort of taking the lead on delivering that review of the Dartmoor and Dartmoor policy. I'm very keen to leave him alone and not interfere in that. I've said the same to Marion Spain, the Chief Exec of Natural England. I don't want them poking their nose in as well. I want to give him a complete free hand to look at this independently and to give us a genuine assessment of what is happening. Because I think in the past, I think some of it is about communication and some of it is about the science. And I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to some of the science. You know, it seems fairly obvious to me that if you remove the stock that have created the environment which you hold so dear, then that will have an impact in that you know, those grasses and bracken, if we're not careful, will start to take over that landscape, and we'll lose the very things that we're, as you indicated, celebrating and holding so dear. But that does not mean that you know, I think we need to increase stock numbers or maintain. I don't know, which is why I'm asking Furston to look at it and come up with the facts. And I think my suspicion is there's somewhere in there is a compromised position that keep stock on those hills that and maintain those landscapes, but maybe we just need to think about some of the management techniques or stocking densities at certain times of year. But I do want to give Furston the space to come forward with that report. At the same time, I do recognise the pressure that those decisions, you know, moving an area into a triple SI, puts on people that are trying to farm in that area. And I think we've got to quite rapidly think about how we can support with taxpayers' money those people that are trying to farm in those areas. Because, you know, if the taxpayer and the government in effect want to manage that landscape in the way in which Natural England are suggesting, number one, let's wait for Furston to report. But number two, if that is the case, then I think that deserves taxpayers' money to support them. And we need to rapidly look at how we can help with SFI and stewardship to help keep those people and make them economically viable.
I think it's a really important point as well, because I think a lot of us would agree this isn't about sheep numbers. In many cases, it is about how sheep are managed in the uplands. And of course, everyone's been driven to reducing labour costs and trying to be more efficient, if you like. And when we try and put more intensity into the management of sheep in upland areas, it takes time.
Yeah.
And, you know, that time costs money. Maybe there could be some technical solutions like electric collars. They've not come through in a commercial way for sheep yet, but they're being trialed. But, you know, it does take time. So I think that money going into those areas to support those farmers that are doing a cracking job and producing the landscape that you described and value is really important. So, yeah, good. Okay, let's move on to a few points that have come up in the Q&A. There's a question here, or a point from Mike Gooding. Minister, are you happy that progress in the essential move to a more sustainable farming practice is moving fast enough? Are you hamstrung by Treasury and a lack of finance? And is food security high enough on the government agenda? And I get that, but I guess that comes within a recognition just over the last week or so about the impact of global temperature rise as well. So are we moving fast enough? Are we doing enough? Do we need more support? And is food security high enough on the government agenda?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make a case for all of those, actually, that, we're not going fast enough, or we need more money, and but we operate within the political system in which we operate. And so I see it as very much my job to make sure that we try and lift that political profile. So I think as a sector, actually, we can all help. And constantly talking about food security doesn't do us any harm as a sector. I think it's important to keep it high on the political agenda, and certainly that's what we try and do within the department to make sure the rest of government recognise how important food production is. But we've got to do that in a way that is sustainable for the long term. And I think that puts us in a very strong position. I think I'm pretty proud of the environmental footprint that the sheep industry and the beef industry has. I think of course, there are things we can do to improve, and there are tweaks that we can make to continue to keep ourselves efficient and environmentally sound. But we'll try and help and support you through the various schemes to achieve that. But yeah, can we go faster? Yeah, I'm sure we could, but certainly on SFI, it's so important to get it right. I mean, we could have had it quicker, but would it have been right? And then, if we get it wrong, your members would be going absolutely mad if they can't access the system or the website falls over. So we're always sort of in this tussle, if you like, between doing it quick and doing it right. And I'd much rather have it right. When we do roll it out, it's got to work properly. Your members need to be able to access it, understand it, be able to apply quite quickly without too much bureaucracy. And I hope that's where we're getting to. And I know it's been frustrating, and I sort of accept some of the criticism that we could have done it quicker, but I'm so keen to get it right that some of that is my fault. I'm saying to the team, let's make sure that this thing works when we roll it out. So by mid-August, that portal will open. People will be able to sort of log their interest. But I'd encourage your members to start and think about and look at what they might want to do, so that when the portal opens, they can wade in and get stuck in. Because if you're in stewardship, then maybe bolting extra stuff onto your stewardship thing is the right thing to do. But you can stack stewardship and SFI together. And if you get the opportunity to join a sort of larger scheme through landscape recovery, I'd encourage you to get stuck in there as well, because you can stack these things on multiple layers and start to build not only a bit of cash, but actually a huge impact in terms of our environmental footprint.
And in fairness, I think you've brought forward a number of options or actions within SFI 2023 that were originally scheduled for 2024. So you brought some forward. Yeah. I also think it's worth recognising that Defra and England are taking a lead across the UK in a way. We are. I know the devolved nations are watching very carefully for things that work and for things that don't work. And we are taking a lead, and I think the whole of the UK is learning from what we do. I've had a couple of comments in the chat and the Q&A as well. One from Anne Wilcox, who's down on Dartmoor, and one from Jane Bassett, who's further north. But basically, I think suggesting that, again, what we've got needs to be recognised. So Anne's talking about the fact that it's not all just rare breeds. It is about native breeds, breeds like the Swaledale and the blackface breeds that aren't numerically challenged, but are really valuable to our landscapes. And, ways to make sure that we support those traditional native genetics and we don't move away too far from, what they stand for is really important. And then Jane goes on to say that, we are moving to a very largely unsupported industry, especially in the uplands. Now, I talk to a lot of farmers who are part of SFI and in all sorts of agri-environment agreements, and I know you recognise this, but in the uplands, things are different because many farmers in the lowlands are saying that SFI, if you take the scaling down of BPS and the scaling up of SFI, if you engage, there are ways of replacing that BPS money. In the uplands, it is slightly different, and lots of those businesses are dependent not just on BPS, but on HLS, and replacing both through the new programs is really tough. Now, I know you recognise that, but they've got a special challenge, a particular challenge, I think, in the uplands.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I do recognise that, which is why we're constantly sort of thinking about how we can help and how we can tweak things to improve them, which is why we've lifted some of the payments. Obviously, we've lifted upland payments to match that of the lowlands, which is a recent change because of the feedback that your members were giving us. So, I think our ears are open. Genuinely, we want to help and support people to make a living up and down the country, to carry on producing food, but also we have got to try and improve our environmental footprint and improve biodiversity at the same time and become more efficient. So if we can help and support your members through direct grants for equipment or getting into these schemes, then that's what we're very keen to do. But our ears are open, and we're constantly looking to tweak these things and improve them.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian Griffiths, who is an ex-NSA chair, has asked a question about whether you envisage continuous amendments to actions and payment rates in the years ahead to ensure desired levels of uptake and outcomes. And related to that as well, I had a question earlier from Dominic Fairman, who is down on Bodmin, who makes the point around long-term agreements, particularly HLS agreements, 10-year agreements, being linked to RPI and CPI on payments. You know, it's a long period of time. Those levels are set, and obviously inflationary costs can really hit the contribution.
So the commitment we've made at this moment in time is to ring fence the £2.4 billion total budget all the way up to the next general election. I think we've got to prove to the Exchequer that we are offering good value for money. You know, we need to be able to make that case. I'm confident we can make that case as long as we do deliver the environmental outcomes that we're saying we're going to deliver. But we do have to recognize as a sector, you know, we're in a competitive world here, and there'll be other departments that will be going to Jeremy Hunt saying, you know, I need new hospitals, I need new schools, I need new roads, new railways. So we've got to build our case to be able to say, look, actually, look at what we've invested, look at the environmental impact we've had, look at what we're doing for food security and how important that is. And to make our case robustly. And you know, I'm certainly up for making that case, and I'm confident we can do, but I do need the help of your members and farmers up and down the country to help us build that case and build that evidence, and to prove we can produce great quality food, we can keep everybody well fed with food security, but also do that with a lower environmental footprint.
Absolutely. And again, coming back to some of your introductory remarks about the importance and the value of the uplands and the appreciation that the uplands have got, and not just our uplands, but a lot of our grassland, you know, the pastoral nature of Britain, I guess, you know, people do appreciate it, contributes a lot to people's both physical and mental well-being. You know, it's so valuable, and we felt for a long time that grassland generally isn't recognized. In fact, if anything, it's been looked at as the poor cousin that can be sacrificed for tree planting and rewilding.
Yeah. And I don't like the phrase rewilding. To us, it's not something that I'm comfortable with. I think you know, biodiversity gain, I get and I welcome. I think as you've identified, you know, when you look at some of the species that are already there on Dartmoor and Exmoor and North Yorkshire moors, etc., you know, I think we need to celebrate that and work together to build on it. You know, and the farmers I talk to are very proud of the wildlife that they are able to host and to promote on their own farms. We can do that alongside food production, though, and you know, these things have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a question that's come in around genetics. Again, there's a number of sheep farmers are really passionate about their breeds. Again, we got such diversity, and there's a place for them all, really. But it doesn't mean that we want to create a museum of genetics. I think you're right that we need to identify some of the really valuable traits that we can make much more use of. But I think there's a strong feeling in this industry that we've got to try to strive to improve our genetics and identify the weaker genetics and take them out, and really try to move forward genetic quality, I guess. And there's a question there really about the use of recorded rams. This may be a little bit outside your area, your sphere of expertise, really, but the use of recorded rams and whether there's any more within our programs, SFI, for instance, we could do to make sure that there is some genetic evaluation. Now, you may or may not be aware that NSA are partners in a new UK RI research program with a number of other partners that are looking at breeding for change being CH4 methane. So what can we do to identify low methane emitters, but also look alongside that at a number of other traits, efficiency, health traits that make our sheep more efficient? Is there anything within our programs that can be done to support that sort of focus?
Yeah, so there's a lot of work going on within universities. Roslyn are doing a lot in Scotland, actually, on these sorts of genetics. And so, you know, I mean, I think so. Number one, we should take credit for what we've achieved. You know, if you look at the sheep of today, the modern sheep of today, and as a butcher, you know, the quality of those bodies that are coming back and the length of the bodies is very impressive. You know, I think we've made huge strides over the past 20 years, And I think we need to go again, don't we? We need to keep pushing in that direction to make sure we're world leading, because there's actually quite a lot of economic value in those genetics. And if you look at some of those ram sales and the price some of those rams are making, then that proves to me in a global sense we've got some of the best genetics in the world and the best breeding. So let's maintain our place in world genetics and keep pushing in that direction. And I think modern technology, as I hinted at, can help us do that as well by picking out some of those traits. But the point I was trying to make is that there may be some little gem that we're not aware of, or we won't be aware of for 20 years, that may be in one of those traditional breeds, which is why we want to sort of keep that stuff around and alive. But albeit I recognize that we do need to keep pushing in the direction of some of these fantastic modern breeds. And we've not even mentioned Texels, have we? But
we can't mention any breed by name.
No, I know, because I'll upset a lot of people. But I think for the butcher, that the genetics are fantastic, to be honest, and we've made huge strides in that direction.
So I'm watching time very carefully. I know you promised us an extra 2 or 3 minutes because we were a little bit late starting, but we've talked quite a lot about I suppose some of the progress we've made and some of the challenges, and the recognition of your recognition of some of the challenges we face. I just want to mention the fact that there is a whole host of work that we don't feel we're making any progress with at all. And I know you're a busy chap. And I know the whole Defra team are really busy, but we've been working within the industry on a number of issues for years, and we can't get any purchase on them whatsoever. So things like carcass splitting and sheep aging, an alternative way to aging sheep rather than tooth eruption, we can't get any progress on that at all. The price reporting and carcass classification, mandatory price reporting, again, it seems to have just stalemate there. Skin on sheep with the Food Standards Agency and production of smokies currently being supplied illegally. Again, we can't make any progress there. Breeding exports is a nightmare. I think the UK is really investing in food exports. You've mentioned about the value of our genetics across the world. They are valued, but there was a really vibrant trade in live breeding animals across the short straits from Dover to Calais. And across Europe for breeding animals, and that since our departure from the European Union has dried up entirely. And if anything, the small number of animals that are making that journey are travelling 3 or 4 or 5 times as far up to Scotland for Stranraer, across to Larne in Northern Ireland, all the way down Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. And whatever we do, we can't seem to make that breakthrough in terms of a border control post with live animal facilities on the other side of the channel.
So I think in response to that, I would say that our relationship with the EU is probably better than it has been for some time. I think solving the Northern Ireland Protocol has really helped with that relationship, and we now are having fairly friendly conversations with our friends in certainly in France and across the EU. So maybe we can resolve that in time. On smokies and split carcasses, I mean, I'm very much up for that conversation. If I'm completely honest with you, Bill, I'm a little bit nervous. I think I think we take for granted consumer confidence in our product. We because we've done such a good job of supplying the market with top quality product, which I don't want to do anything that jeopardizes that confidence of the consumer. And I'm happy to look at sort of split carcasses and at smokies, but I'm terrified of an Edwina Curry type moment, if I'm honest, being the minister that sort of opens a can of worms that we can't then shut, because that would be a disaster for us right at the moment where we've just got complete confidence of our consumers and reasonable prices. But I'm up for that conversation. And I am genuinely open to a view. So I mean, on smokies, there are 2 views. One is, as you say, that marketplace clearly does exist, that people are consuming that product. On the other hand, people have said to me that the people that are consuming that product and are, if you like, doing that practice will never comply with FSA rules. We can try and put FSA rules in place to help them, but they'll never comply because they don't sort of want to operate in that marketplace and jump through the hoops. And so I'm sort of a little bit torn, you know. So I mean, I'm open to a conversation with your members, and I'm happy to take their guidance really in the direction of travel. It's something we've looked at quite closely. But as I say, consumer confidence is very, very important.
Absolutely, it is, and it is to us. The reputation of our industry is, it's fundamental to our future success, really. So we would agree with you. But let's if you need to, it's 6 minutes past 9. So
yeah, well, so I better escape. But can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Really helpful. Lots of your members will be mixed farms. Will be doing beef and lamb together. There is a raging debate taking place within government across the United Kingdom about ultra high frequency or low frequency tagging, and it'd be really helpful to me to get a steer from your members or from the association as to which direction you want to go. Whether so, number one, we have to have a system that operates in Scotland and England, the same system, and there's quite a debate and a bit of research ongoing as to which is the best. Whether it's ultra high frequency or low frequency tags. I'm conscious lots of your members will already have low frequency tags on sheep. Do you mind having 2 readers if ultra high frequency is proven to be better, or are we better pushing for low frequency? The Scots seem to favour the high frequency model, so we do need to form a view fairly soon as to which is the best direction to go.
Okay, well, we can discuss that further, but we are involved with some of the trials that are going on at Harper Adams up in at the moment, and you know, I suppose the most important thing at the moment is that we are using low frequency tags. All of our sheep are tagged with low frequency tags, and everyone's got low frequency reading equipment. So you know, to change that would be a massive disruption for the organisation. And I'm not sure that I'm not hearing people say within the sheep sector that we're going to gain a lot more from high frequency, ultra high frequency tags.
Yeah.
But okay. But and the other thing to say there is that we are a UK wide organisation, so we can do some internal consultations with our Scotland and Welsh and Northern Ireland colleagues as well on that subject. So we're very happy to do that.
Yeah, spot on. All right. I'm sorry to have to dash.
Thank you very much, Mark.
You know, we'll catch up soon and stay in touch.
Thanks, Minister. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
All right. Good to see you.
Good. Janet, so it's over to you now. And you've been in this role for slightly longer than 10 months.
I have.
And I think you're probably well known amongst some of the people on this call.
Yeah, it's good to see some familiar names coming up in the chat and in the questions. So
and you've also become probably even better known during this summer of shows where you've made strenuous efforts to be out and about, I guess, at all sorts of shows, talking to people, and you've been to you know, some of the NSA events as well. So thank you for that.
And it's good actually. 3 years of doing that means we've start bumping into the same folk again, and people are not sort of looking at us going, oh, what is Defra doing here? And we're able to just sort of have a conversation. It's really good. Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we start in the way that we often start these things, with you just giving a few moments of your thoughts, you know, where you think we are and you know, where we're going next, really. Yeah, absolutely. So I think I don't want to take up too much time. Like the Minister said, it's more important to answer your questions. And there's a few that we can go over in a bit more detail than we were able to cover with the Minister as well, if you like. I think in terms of where we are, people who've dialed in will probably already be well aware that we've just published all of the detailed information about the SFI offer for 2023. We've made some quite significant changes to the design of that scheme, the biggest one being that when we're offering the actions as standalone individual actions now, not actions bundled together into standards where you have to do all of the things in the standard and you go through levels of ambition, but instead each action on its own and you decide how much or how little you want to do. And we've done that because of feedback from people in the pilot and people in the early rollout and people who haven't taken part so far, who have said, actually, these standards are a bit too restrictive for me. And that doesn't mean we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because we do think we need to do things to help farmers find the actions that are relevant to them. Not everybody wants to read 150 pages of manual. I can't think why not, to find all the things that are relevant to them. And so we've produced some leaflets now which summarize all the actions that are available for farmers in the uplands, for example, across CS and SFI. And we're going to be doing things in the service as well to make it clear when you log in which particular actions are available on which bits of your land, to try and help find an easy way in. But we think the kind of restrictive, you must do these things approach puts a lot of people off, because they don't want to be able to flex and adapt. So we've made some quite big changes on that basis, and we've continued with the much less prescriptive approach, the more pragmatic approach to controls, and a much wider range of options. There's a lot more to come in 2024. And if you come into SFI this year, you'll be able to add those new options in next year. And of particular relevance to colleagues on this call is going to be some of the new moorland options that are going to come in next year, peatland restoration, some of the grazing management type options for uplands and moorlands, and also enhancing the offer for grasslands, which we know is of some of grassland farmers and livestock farmers are looking at these schemes and thinking, well, if I'm already in a scheme, what more can I do? What are my payment rates looking like for doing things like species-rich grassland, and how do I access some of the options that are currently only available in higher tier? So a lot of the work we're doing now for next year's offer is about expanding access to the full range of options, reviewing all the prices again to make sure that they're up to date and that the price recipes, as we call them, the way we calculate the prices are fair and reasonable, and that we've got good rewards in place for the grassland options alongside the arable options, and we've got a good range of things for you to do there. And we've also been adjusting the rules of schemes. So if you are already in a scheme, whether it's HLS or CLS, it's much easier for you now to transfer between schemes and to add more options on top of what you've already got through additional agreements. So if you've been looking at these schemes in the last couple of years, I do encourage you to have another look at SFI, this year's offer, because it is more flexible and it's got more in it than we were planning to do, and it works differently to the previous offer. But also have a look at what we published in January in an environmental land management update, where we listed everything we're going to pay for this year and next year and beyond. And some of those options are new, and we'll publish more details about those before the end of this year, so you'll have all of that information available to you. I think the one other thing I just want to say is that we do really recognise the challenges and difficulties that you're faced if you're farming livestock, with the volatility in prices, with the impacts of extreme weather and climate change, whilst also being blamed for climate change in many cases, and all of the other stress that comes with the changes that are happening in the sector and to the kind of communities and to the wider economy. And we do really respect that, and respect the role that you play in producing food for the country, but also in your local communities and in the landscape and in the heritage and in tourism for that matter. And we want to make sure that what we're doing really works in that context. And that's why we've got our pilot, and I can see some of our pilot farmers are on the call. That's why we're engaging so extensively with farmers, and we're always really keen to have a conversation to understand what's working, what isn't. And we will, I saw Brian asked a question in the chat about continuing to adapt the options, and we will definitely do that. And we don't muck about with schemes lightly, because we know that when we change things, that creates uncertainty and stress, and we don't want to do that lightly. But it's really important that we're engineering here a very complex system, or we're trying to intervene in a very complex system, and what we've got to do is, just like you will when you're farming, do something, see how it goes, and then adjust it for the next year, adjust it for the next year, adjust it for the next year, and keep making it better and better. But we've got to do that in a smooth way that doesn't create undue instability and uncertainty and stress for you, because we've got to make this work for your business, and you've got to be able to plan. So that's a really tricky balance to get right. We certainly won't always get it right, but we do recognise the importance of doing that, and we do really carefully try to work with you, Phil, and others to really understand what's the right sequencing here. And the final thing just to say is massive thanks to you, Phil, and to everybody here, particularly those who are taking part in our pilots and tests and trials and giving us feedback, because we can't succeed without that sort of engagement, because if this doesn't work for farmers, then it doesn't work. Yeah. So it's really important that we carry on these conversations, really.
Well, thanks for that. And I mean, we're involved because it's important to us. This needs to work for us. And in general, I think people are of the view that you are listening, your team are listening, you're trying to make the changes, and it is difficult. I know. Just to come back on that as well around controlled rollout. Again, I can understand why. I can understand the sense behind controlled rollout, because we need to get it right, don't we? But I guess there is some nervousness at the moment with people having their, and I think it's probably only a smallish number, but their SFI 22 agreements drawn to a close, and then having to enter into SFI 23, but with a controlled rollout. How controlled will that be? How delayed will their entry to that scheme be? How will that affect their cash flow?
Yeah, so this is very important that we don't disadvantage any early adopters of any sort. And that means people in existing schemes already, people who've been doing these actions for years, people who've joined our pilot, or people who joined SFI in 2022, because it's not fair to disadvantage people who've come in early, and we promised we wouldn't do that. But also, if we have those farmers unhappy, nobody else is going to come into the schemes either, so we'll fail. So it's really important that we get this right. Because of the changes that we've made, moving from this bundles and standards to this set of standalone actions, when we thought we would just be able to carry on the 22 agreements as they were, because we didn't want to be disruptive unless absolutely necessary. But as we got into the delivery, we realized that if we did that, we would be restricting the options available to those who had come in early. And we absolutely cannot do that, because we don't want to be disadvantaging anybody. And we want you to be able to take advantage of the new options as soon as they're available, really. So that's why we decided to end the 2022 agreements. We certainly didn't take that decision lightly. And we have made sure that nobody in an existing agreement will lose out financially. So we have promised to pay you for certain things, a certain amount of money for 3 years, and we will fulfill that promise. So anything that you can't take forward in 2023, you will be compensated for in good faith for the duration of the contract that you signed up to. So that's the first important thing to say. And the second thing that's important to say is we don't want you to have a gap between agreements. So the way this will work is we've written to everybody in this situation to let you know at a high level how this will work, and RPA will be in touch with each person individually, each farm individually, to make sure everybody knows what's going to happen. And what we want to do is provide a smooth transition from one agreement to the other. So we need to give you 6 months notice, because that's what it says in the contract. We expect that lots of people want to go earlier than that into SFI 2023. We're making plans to support that as best we can as part of this controlled rollout, and the RPA will be in touch. But we don't want you to have a gap, obviously, between agreements. So we want to make it so that as soon as we're ready for you to transfer across and you're ready to transfer across, that we can facilitate that. And the controlled rollout, all that means is that when we open for applications in August, the way in is to contact the RPA, and the RPA will, in a controlled way, let a certain number of people apply each day and watch really closely. And you always, when you roll out a system like this, you always find something, some case that you hadn't quite anticipated that doesn't quite work as you expected, and you want to take a look at it and tweak it before you then let lots more people just automatically go in without any controls. And so we do that as quickly as we can, but we do it so that we can spot issues at small scale, fix them quickly, and then scale up from there, rather than launching something to everybody and then finding issues and then not being able to manage them. So it's just about being very careful in our management. It shouldn't take very long, and we'll go as quickly as we can, but it's much better that you contact the RPA will then be in touch with each person that wants to apply, arrange for them to apply, make sure it really goes smoothly and you get the support that you need. And then we'll take the stabilizers off as and when we can see that the bike is nice and stable and it's all working exactly as it should. And this is what we did last year for SFI 2022, and it worked really well for us and it worked really well for the farmers involved. And so that's what we want to do again. And it's all about not repeating the mistakes of the past, really.
Absolutely, yeah, which is important. I got 2 questions from close friends down in North Devon, Brian and Liz Griffiths, who are, I have to say, immensely helpful to all of us, to Defra and to NSA.
They are. I don't know how they do it. They seem to be everywhere all the time, Brian and Liz. Lovely to not quite see you, but to know you're here, Brian and Liz.
They're so good at interrogating things and understanding things in real depth. But I'll take these points separately, because they're both really important. You know, one of the main principles of SFI at the outset was that these schemes were going to be simple, and they could be applied for with farmers without the cost and the complexity of using an advisor. But Liz is suggesting that the complexity of the pick and mix stacking across the schemes possibly, for many people, has made the use of advisors unavoidable, which would be a real shame. Is that the case, or are people looking at this with too much complexity? Is it not as complex as it looks?
I think the application process now is much more straightforward and intuitive, and it's difficult to do it wrong. So you go online, you can see your parcels and you can see what options are available and how much land there is in them, and it calculates that for you automatically, and it's much quicker and more straightforward. And people who have applied for SFI so far and done it themselves have been really surprised. I've met farmers who've said they've gone into their office with a heavy heart thinking, oh God, I'm going to be here all day, and nobody likes doing that today. You want to be out farming, and nobody wants to be sat in their office filling in government forms, and they've come out 40 minutes later having completed it. So that bit of the process we think we've got working well. It's going to be more complex this time because there's more options, but we're going to build on what we've done so far. Where there is complexity, though, is between Countryside Stewardship mid-tier and SFI. And that's just a product of the way that we've rolled out SFI, starting small alongside CS. And we made that decision because we wanted to do a test and learn approach and make sure we got it right. But the price you pay for that is the complexity of having both. What we're going to do next year, so this year we're at peak complexity for that purpose, because we've got the full SFI offer open and we're scaling up. We've got the full CS offer open, and we're scaling up SFI. And so there is some complexity. I think it would be fair to say, if you're trying to look across both schemes and work out how to combine them. What we're going to do next year is put pretty much all of mid-tier basically into SFI. So it's not 2 different schemes, it's one coherent overall offer You don't have multiple versions of different of the same option. You've got a hedgerow option, a low input grassland option, and what have you. And you can see the whole lot, and you can use the system to make the whole lot add up. And if you're already in an agreement at that stage, you'll be able to use that system to add more things to your agreement, and gradually we'll gradually morph to just have an agreement. You won't need to worry about what scheme it's in, and you won't need to worry about matching things across. So I think it's a fair point from Brian and Liz that at the moment it is more complicated, but it is, once you go onto the application service, it's more straightforward and you can see what it is that you're able to do. But next year we'll take another leap forward on this to make it much more simple and streamlined for everybody, and really take a leap forward in the kind of quality of the service that you get and your ability to do it yourself. And the reason we haven't done that yet, in case you're wondering, is because we needed to build the foundations of being able to do that. We needed to get that automated service in place. We needed to know what we're actually offering in SFI and get confident about what that looks like and build the kind of foundations for that, which we've now done. And we've got to launch SFI 23 successfully. And then we've done that, and then we can build on that to make it simple and streamline it. So that's the kind of sequencing that we're going through.
I think the other thing that I think I've noticed is that the harmonization or the involvement of both Defra and RPA together in lots of these discussions and decisions is something that I don't think I've seen before. So, and in terms of effective rollout, that's really important. I'll come back to
it's crucial, and that's one of the root causes of failures in the past. And it's not easy either, but it is really, really important that we work closely together like that.
Yeah, indeed. I'll come back to Brian's second question in a moment, because I think what you've just said relates to a couple of comments made by James Taylor. Sounds like a famous singer, doesn't it, really? But James Taylor and Andrew in the chat, really, about that mix between countryside stewardship and SFI, and the fact that for those already in a higher tier CS scheme, the advice that they've been given is that SFI offers very little, but what you've talked about in terms of what might happen next year, it should resolve that.
Yeah, and I would take a look at it yourself, because it would be a rare case where you've already got absolutely everything you could possibly do in an agreement. So it'd be pretty unusual for you not to have any opportunity to add to that, either through CS mid-tier or SFI, particularly because there are new options in SFI, which can be stacked on top of existing agreements. So in the new handbook that we published, and which I'll post a link to that in the chat when I take a breath in a second. But if not, have a look at it. Have a look for it online. It's called the SFI Handbook 2023. In each section, it says this action can be put on top of the following CS options, and you might be able to put it in the same field alongside each other. So do take a look at the detail before kind of taking generic advice about that, because it could be the case in a very small number of cases, but I'd be surprised if you had absolutely everything you could possibly have in an agreement and there was nothing more to add. But then the other thing I would say is that where we've increased prices in the last couple of years in CS, we have applied that to all agreement holders. So if you're already in a scheme, you don't lose out. Everybody got any increases were applied to all agreement holders at the same time on revenue, and that's really important, again, not to disadvantage those who've come in early. And with that, we expect to carry that on if we review prices again this year.
And Andrew makes a similar comment, really, about the fact that going into CS has excluded him from a lot of SFI. Another question there really is around the Future Farm Resilience Fund and the free advice that's available. Now, neither James or Andrew mentions whether they've taken that service up, but presumably the deliverers of that service are all well enough informed to be able to give detailed guidance on the compatibility of CS and SFI.
Yeah, they are now. And so I was talking actually to some providers of the Resilience Fund yesterday. So the Resilience Fund, if you're not familiar with it, is we're funding business planning advice through expert providers all over the country, and you can choose who provides your advice, and you can have a free session where they come to your farm and help you work through your particular options for your particular farm. And we were reflecting yesterday on the fact that when that started, there wasn't a huge amount of information available to them about actually specifically what was coming in the new schemes, whereas now they've got all that detail and they are able to advise on the particular, like how you might combine CS and SFI on your particular farm and what the options are that are looking like that are available to you. So I've just put a link to the information about that in the chat if people are able to access it. Maybe we can put it in a follow-up email as well, Phil, just so that everybody can see where to find that advice. And I would really, if you haven't taken advice like that, then I would really encourage you to take a look, because we do get good feedback about that on the whole from people, even people who already get regular business planning advice. I've met farmers who've switched providers as a result of that, or have just got a different perspective, and it's nothing to lose, have you? If it's free, somebody's going to come and spend a couple of hours with you.
Absolutely. So that takes us into the other question from Brian, really, which this is one that we've talked about before, and is dear to my heart, which is about carbon footprint. And given the climate challenges that we all face, and the fact that the industry is under pressure from lots of different quarters, from the supply chain in some cases, from some of the assurance schemes around starting to think about carbon footprinting, and I think we have to play our part in climate change. We know that some of the Future Farm Resilience Fund providers will offer and can deliver carbon footprints. So I know some that have had those carbon footprints done.
Yeah.
When can we get to a point where actually carbon footprint can be a funded option for everyone? I guess that's the fundamental question.
Yeah, we've been looking at that, and there's a number of different ingredients to this. There is a team in Defra that are working on the wider issues about setting the rules for the road, setting standards for carbon auditing and those sorts of issues. And there's been a publication earlier this year about what the roadmap looks like for that. And the key thing there, in my view, is the agreeing of standards about carbon on farms, so that everybody can understand how to measure, how to validate that the carbon is real and enduring, and how to tell it is additional, and then you know what tools to use that are going to reflect those standards. So that's a really important piece of work, and we will continue aligning what we're doing to that. We think it is really important for us to support people who want to do baselining and auditing, not just for carbon, but also water, biodiversity, any sort of natural capital ecosystem type assessments, really. As you say, that is available through some of the resilience fund providers, but it's not particularly advertised as a main feature of that offer. What we've been looking at is how might we evolve that offer so that it morphs from a sort of initial sort of, gosh, BPS are going, what can I do about it type of advice, into more of a kind of regular business resilience planning type advice, which would draw on that kind of baselining and any other information about what's available in the private sector and the public sector, what sort of things you want to do for your business, into a more rounded, comprehensive business advice offer. And that's going to be useful both for the supply chain, potentially private markets as and when they develop, and also government schemes. So we think that's the right route to provide that advice rather than an SFI option, but we are open-minded about that. If it becomes clear that actually having an SFI option, a bit like the ones we've got on pest management and nutrient management, of having an expert come and do that assessment for you, then we can put it in there instead. But I think the principle is definitely accepted that we should do something on this, and that we should start making this available, because farmers increasingly really want to be able to do that baselining. My one worry about doing it in SFI is that, given I call it a low trust environment between Defra, RPA and farmers, and we have to respect and recognise that it's going to take years for us to turn that around. And that means that when we ask farmers for data, they worry that we're going to use it against them. So if we put it in SFI, then that worry might prevent people accessing it. Whereas if it's in the resilience fund, where it's an independent provider, we don't have access to any of the data, it's private between you and the organisation you're talking to, there isn't any risk of that for you. So there's a sort of, we need to test where is it actually most likely to be attractive to farmers, so that they can take it up and make use of it, and see how that's best presented for people as part of the work on this, really.
As is the work going on, I think you might have mentioned this, but the work going on to make sure that there is more consistency around the metrics behind carbon footprint as well. We're never going to get to a point where there is only one carbon footprint tool, and probably neither should we, really. But the metrics behind the system behind them needs to be more consistent.
Yes, you want standards so that you can be confident that if you use a tool, it's not going to be complete nonsense and rejected by everybody who wants to know what your carbon is. But I do want to say, by the way, we're not going to use people's data against them. But me saying that is not enough to convince everybody. We've got to show that over a number of years, and we've got to continue showing that what we're trying to do here is be helpful. But that's not what people have been expecting from us historically, and it's a big shift to bring about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Does your work, Janet, take you into that really difficult area of HLS rollover agreements and common land? It does. It does,
yeah. And I don't obviously look after the process for individual agreements. That's managed by Natural England and then RPA. But we do set the policy here in Defra, and this is a really important. HLS, it's really important. HLS in general, we've got to focus now more on what is going to happen to the people in those agreements, and what is a decent route forward for them into whether it's a higher tier type agreement, or whether it's an SFI type agreement, or some other kind of agreement. And we know that we've got a number of issues there. We've got the kind of restrictions on capacity to move people into higher tier, and the competitive nature of higher tier, which means that for some people who aren't doing very ambitious action at scale in a protected site, they're not going to get to the top of the heap to move into higher tier. And so what we've got to do there is remove those restrictions and make it possible for more people to get into a higher tier agreement, but also give wider access to the higher tier options for those who are not doing them at scale or in a protected site. Because if you've got a small area of species rich grassland, why should you not restore that just because it's not in a triple SI or whatever, or on a great scale? So there's some things we need to do there. Then when it comes to the interaction between triple SI consents and whether it's HLS or high tier or anything else, we know we've had a lot of issues there. We were talking about Dartmoor earlier, you were just talking about Bodmin, somebody else in the chat was talking about in the north, and I know in Cumbria this is a very sensitive issue, and that is a much more complex issue about the interaction between regulation and incentives. And part of what we want to do there is design our schemes to make them much more flexible, and also to make them more sensitive to different levels of ambition that you might pursue, so that you get properly compensated for the work that you're doing. And it's not just about somebody saying to you, you've got to have this many sheep, but instead you can have you can be properly rewarded and paid for what you're doing. But also there's a kind of wider issue about how those two things are managed and how the interaction of those two things are managed. And there is a limit to my role in that, because NE are a statutory organisation with statutory responsibilities in respect of triple SIs, but we in Defra can set policy that can help set the parameters for that. And we do work very closely with NE, who recognise this issue and who know that's why they're kind of supporting the independent review on Dartmoor and kind of agreeing to.
And for the sake of clarity as well, the independent review on Dartmoor, there's been a lot of talk about this 1+4, so people can roll their agreements on and maintain the current standards for through another 12 months of negotiation, if you like. That is a principle that I understand stands for all commons across England, not just Dartmoor, that 1+4.
I think that's just for Dartmoor for now, but we obviously, in doing that, we've set a precedent, haven't we? And so others are going to look to that and say, well, I want to do that too. And we were very aware that might happen, and we know that there are issues that are not specific to Dartmoor. So we've just kind of Dartmoor is a kind of a case study in a way for a much wider set of issues.
Natural England, that it does apply to Bodmin.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
But even 1+4, 1 year is not long in a farming calendar, and for someone who is being asked to make some really substantial changes to their business, to do that over a 1 year period is really difficult, if not impossible, actually.
Yes, and one of the questions we've been looking at is, could we have agreements which are not, you've got to do this from the beginning, but you've got to do it during the course of the agreement. You've got to make progress towards this particular thing, and we can recognise the kind of trajectory to get there, and whether maybe that's something that we can do to provide a bit more pragmatism and flexibility, because that's what it's all about now. It's about pragmatism, partnership, a kind of commercial business-like relationship, not a kind of parent-child type relationship, and a kind of recognition that we're trying to do multiple things here, and that's always going to be sensitive. As the minister said, we're trying to make sure we can support food production and the landscape and heritage and communities, and also these environmental outcomes, and also the culture part of agriculture is often, farmers have often said to me, like, what about the culture part of this? Do you actually get that? And I've certainly in my 3 years in this role, going around all sorts of different farms and farm communities, it's really very clear to me how important that is, and we've got to have policies and an approach that recognise and respect that, haven't we?
Absolutely. Culture, heritage, rural economies, all those sorts of things are really important. Viv Lewis is chair of our Northern region, and
yes, I know Viv. Hi, Viv.
Viv, she's made a point that the pick and mix and the stacking of SFI actions, each one will have monitoring requirements. Will this become a real bureaucratic burden, and will it put people off applying? And I know that's a real balance, isn't it, that you've tried to address the actions with the monitoring that goes behind them. But,
yes, and the root cause of the kind of draconian, you might say, take measures at dawn kind of approach that everybody's worried about is actually in the design of the options and the actions. Because if you put a rule in the action that says this thing must happen on this date, then the RPA have to go and control that. Whereas if we say, broadly speaking, make sure, do this, like achieve this sort of outcome, like have some winter cover, if you're arable, have some winter cover, or leave grassland so that there are seeds in place for birds over winter, do it in whatever way is going to work in your particular setting, then you have much more flexibility. And that means you can have a much more pragmatic approach to the controls that go with it. And those two things have to go hand in hand, because you can't have tape measure at dawn if you've got a very flexible standard, because what are you measuring? You've got to be able to have that kind of professional conversation. So the root of this is designing the actions in a way that is workable on a farm and that you can adapt and flex to suit your farm. And then there's the move from a kind of detect and punish kind of approach, and assume there's going to be things wrong and your job is to find them out, to facilitate, enable and prevent things going wrong kind of approach in an advisory sort of a way. And that's what RPA colleagues and other ALB colleagues are working on across regulation and schemes, actually. So we absolutely are not trying to, we're trying to make this straightforward, light touch, etc. Obviously, if you just don't do what you're supposed to do, or you willfully start discharging slurry into a river or whatever, then there needs to be consequences for that, because there is a role for making sure that those standards are met, both in regulation and the schemes. But for most people, that's not what's actually relevant. Most people are trying to do the right thing, and we can help with that. And we've got some examples where we've succeeded in getting this approach in place. So we get really good feedback about the catchment sensitive farming offer, which is much more advisory and collaborative and professional, and support professional as in commercial relationship kind of professional, and that's the sort of culture that we're trying to spread now.
It's a massive cultural change, isn't it? Both within the farming community and within Defra and within RPA and between everyone as well. And I guess a lot of farmers are still coming at this from a point of cross-compliance penalties when they get something wrong. So
it can be done. I was talking to a colleague the other day who used to be a director in HMRC, and he set up the Welsh equivalent of HMRC, and they set it up from the beginning with the intention of achieving this sort of cultural shift. And they've done really good work. They've got a very, very different culture in their organisation, which is all about helping people who are trying to run a business and helping prevent problems and helping deal with them when they arise and all that kind of thing. So you can bake helpfulness into a culture that's been very steeped in penalties, but it's going to take time for us to do it, and then it's going to take time for everybody to see it play through. But we are starting to get feedback now about RPA visits, they're called visits now, not inspections, being more pragmatic and supportive and constructive. And so we are seeing kind of the green shoots of this, I think, but it is going to take a while to get to the nirvana that we're all aiming for. But absolutely, we're not going to have a massive bureaucracy, loads of form filling. We just said keep evidence in the course of what you're doing to show what you've done, and that do that in a proportionate way that would enable you to say, no, I did do that, I did sow the seeds or have the cover in place or whatever it is that you've done.
Great, thanks, Janet. It is coming up to 20 to 10, so we want to wrap up in a moment. But I just got one other question that I would like to ask, which is about impact assessments as well. And the post CAP, I guess the whole approach to Defra and the government support for agriculture has been at least twofold, hasn't it? It's been partly a incentive and reward for delivery of public goods that can't be recouped through the marketplace, and secondly, investment in ways of making farming enterprises more productive, more efficient, more able to stand on their own 2 feet. It's a complex sort of mix of those two things. But has there been much of an impact assessment on the changes to farming businesses, and even the financial impact that those productivity measures could have in different farming settings, an upland and a lowland farming setting, for instance?
Yes, and we published when we did the Agriculture Act in 2019, we published our analysis of the kind of the way that the sector works, what's driving farm profitability, what role do BPS payments play in different sizes, locations and types and tenancy types of farms, which farms are going to find it more easy or more difficult to transition away from BPS. And what that showed us is that lowland and upland grazing livestock farms are the ones which have the largest proportion of their income coming from BPS, and the smallest the bigger constraints on the extent to which you can improve productivity. And that's what led to the government at the time deciding to do a 7-year transition and not do, as has been done in other places, just suddenly overnight removing BPS. And that's what led to the decision to have this combination of productivity support, including the Resilience Fund, and also environmental land management schemes. As our thinking has evolved over that time, we tend to see those much less as separate things now. And when we're designing schemes, when we're designing environment schemes, we're not just thinking what's the environmental outcome here, we're thinking what impact does this have on food production, on business viability, on different types of farms? Have we got a comprehensive offer in place for all the different kinds of farms that's actually workable and viable for them? And then also in productivity, we also think for these productivity support things we're putting in place, do they help with reducing emissions? Can they help with biodiversity and water quality. So it's much more of a integrated view, and in everything we do, we're trying to make sure we pursue these mixed priorities. And I think it would be fair to say there's some things that we've got to do. We've got to make sure we've got a decent offer in place, and that there are viable things for you to do, and that it makes business sense for you to do the things that we want you to do in these schemes. And we know that we've got to keep reviewing the offer and keep extending it and making sure the prices are fair and all those sorts of things. And we're going to introduce premium prices next year, which will help with this, so that if you do actions in the right combinations or the right places, or you join up with your neighbours, you can get bonus payments on top of the base level payment, and that will help farmers to really start ramping up their income through schemes. So we've got that role to play, and we also think providing this funding for business planning advice is really important. But also, it's true to say that that evidence showed that there are changes that can be made within the sector about things like breed efficiency and feed efficiency, how you manage your grazing rotations, what breeds, what kind of breed you use in particular settings, and all, and how you think about your business in terms of all the assets that you've got and how you can best use them. And I'm not suggesting everyone should get a shepherd hut for a second, but there are lots of different ways in which you can reduce waste, reduce costs, and increase income that are not just about schemes. And so we're trying through things like the animal health and welfare pathway and wider interventions like that to try and provide a whole menu of ways to support farmers to think about all of those different ways to make their business viable and profitable and to thrive. And there are some brilliant examples in the sheep sector of farmers doing this and showing leading the way and showing what can be done. And our job is to get behind that. So it's not for me to say, here's how to do it, but it's for us to say, spot that and say, gosh, what's the magic sauce there? How can we make that available to more people? And that's what we're trying to do. The final thing to say about that is kind of everything is connected. One thing, sorry, Phil, one other thing I was going to say about that is the value of farm to farm advice and discussion groups and peer learning and support. And we've learned through our test and trials and through what we can see happening in the sector that the organisations like yours, those that operate locally, that are trusted by farmers, local facilitators and advisors, are absolutely critical for this. And so we've got to really up our game in our support for that kind of intervention, because it's not all about government to farmer relationships. It's actually about within the sector, those relationships. And the NSA does some brilliant work on this, I know, as do others, and we've got to really support that more, I think.
Yeah, indeed. And we've seen that in an animal health context, I guess, through the recent RDP sheep scab program, you know, in various areas across the country, where that local coordination and local knowledge and of the players involved has been central. So one of the challenges, I guess, is to get their thinking and as broad as it needs to be, because it needs to be environmental as well as animal health, and you know, there's a lot of connectivity that needs to be made. But no, that's great. Okay, look, it's coming up towards 1:45, so we could go on for longer, but we mustn't. And I'd just like to thank you very much for coming and joining us. Obviously, Mark, I didn't say Mark's a politician. You are a civil servant, I guess. Yeah, Mark may or may not be with us in 12 months' time. Who knows, really? But you know, let's just hope that the current trajectory continues, and if there is any political change, that it doesn't result in any major swings in direction, because I think once we're on this pathway, we just need to keep going.
And I think all the main parties are saying that's what they would do. And I mean, obviously, I don't represent any of them, and I'll work for whoever you all elect and whoever we all elect, in fact. And that's my job as a civil servant. But they are all saying that they would maintain the overall direction of travel. And the discussion is about what's the size of the budget, who would do a best job, how is this working for different types of farmers, and how can we improve it? That's where the discussion is. So it's about making it work better as we go forward, rather than very big wholesale change as things stand at the moment in that discussion.
Do you know, I remember meeting up with George Eustace way back. I don't know when this was, actually. It was a long time ago. It would have been around the time of just after the EU referendum. And he said to me at that time, my aim is to produce an agricultural policy that is party political proof. Yeah. I think there's a lot of sense in that, actually. It needs to be a policy that really works for the industry, that is owned by the industry and the industry sector. And if it does work, and if it's really delivering, then there's no reason why it shouldn't be.
Yeah, but it's got to be like a tall building. I can't stand going in tall buildings because they're not rigid, they sway, and they have to stay up. So the reason they're stable is because they're flexible, and that's what we've got to do. We've got to have the building, but be able to flex with the wind and the weather, so that we can build a system that is self-improving and can respond to democracy, quite rightly, in a smooth and kind of stable way, so that we don't. I mean, what my kind of fundamental aim here is to make it so we don't need another program like the one I'm leading in 5 or 10 years' time, because what we've built is something that can flex and adapt but in a way that is workable and smooth for farmers, and that continues to deliver the outcomes that the government of the day, whoever that may be, want to see, so that you don't have to have the kind of let's rip it up and start again kind of stoppy-starty approach, which is really disruptive for everybody we know.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you very much indeed.
Not at all. Thanks for having me.
We'll do this again at some stage in a not too distant future, I'm sure. Thanks very much. And thanks to everyone for attending. Again, just a final huge thank you to our sponsors as well. Roythorn, to an excellent firm of solicitors and lawyers, and Rathbones as well, who are another excellent company of investment managers. So again, huge thanks to sponsors for helping this to happen, and thanks to Mark and to Janet for joining us, and for everyone that's taken part. And we'll speak again soon. Okay.
Thanks a lot. Bye.